First of all, could you introduce yourself briefly for me?
Okay, I'm Nick McCabe. I'm a part-time lecturer at Staffordshire University here in Stoke. I'm also guitarist and producer. Various things I do. I was with the Verve for 20 years. My current project's called Submarine. But I do quite a lot of session work these days. And I'm teaching here as well.
That's a nice segue into the next one. Can you briefly describe your music career so far?
Yeah, I founded my first band while I was at sixth form actually, and that's kind of where I made my name really. So I was with the Verve for over 20 years with a hiatus in the middle, and I've always been the kind of backroom boy who happened to be in the band as well really. So demos and things like that were always my responsibility with that band. But before that I was a synth nerd really, so I've kind of taken that technical aspect into life as a guitarist, which it's been odd, but it's kind of spurred me the insanity of just doing guitar for 24 hours a day really. It's not something that I consider my main reason for being really. So musically I've kind of allowed more of my broader interest to come back into the Black Submarine project, but I think where my focus is, I'm just currently tackling 30 years of electronic music that I've been making, which is the kind of bulk of my work really. And obviously that's not made me any money, or nobody's even heard it in that respect. So it's something that I need to kind of tackle about how I actually released that. Specifically in 2019 the industry changed quite a lot really, so we were very fortunate to get signed at an early age and have the financial support of record labels. So yeah, it's a very different situation now really.
So what other instruments do you play besides guitar then?
I go all the way back to junior school at recorder and then E flat tenor horn after that. So I started off playing brass instruments really. But like I say, my main interest is with electronic music. So I started with a Roland SH-101 and a tape machine, and kind of picked guitar up as one of those. See if I can really. So I can get a sound out of most things. I'm your typical master of non-jack of all trades character really. So I can get a sound out of trumpet for example, but
okay.
Better that I don't play that in public really.
So the main sort of genre that bands like Black Submarine and Verve come under is experimental rock. What does experimental rock mean to you?
I'm not sure that that's strictly true really. I think I kind of we've struggled with the Verve in particular. Early days, Stuart McConey said there was too much insanity in the madness. So and now retrospectively that band is seen as kind of the middle of the road aspects of Britpop really, which both of those viewpoints are funny to me really, but I would say experimental with a small e really. We're working within pop music, and there's a very pop sensibility to it, but there's an interesting texture and kind of not adhering to standard form really. I think I think a lot of those things are irrelevant now, and I don't think we've ever done anything particularly radical in terms of form. It's just that things in terms of form and pop music in general is a very formatted medium anyway really. So quite a lot of the time some of the experimental aspects have been accidental. It's just been us not just being not mindful of convention, but actively being ignorant of convention, not realising that certain things were important considerations. For example, the second Verve single was 9 minutes wrong. 9 minutes wrong. It was 9 minutes wrong. It was actually 9 minutes wrong, and we got it was 9 minutes long, and we got the head of a Virgin come down to our gig that night and tell us we were committing commercial suicide, which was we thought we'd made a grand statement, but it was apparently we were committing commercial suicide. So some of it is, I think, experimental with a small e means that the format is whatever we feel like doing at a time, and sometimes that's conventional and recognisable as pop music, and other times it's perhaps not so much, really.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of it's got to do with listening habits, really. I think we've got people whose taste in music I like, and people that I end up working with, have always got very broad taste in music, really. So inevitably that's reflected in the music that's made.
Do you want to tell me a little bit about experimental rock?
Experimental rock is it's about breaking accepted conventional formats.
Okay.
And so it's difficult to be an experimental artist generally, because everything gets formatted. What's radical in one era becomes next era's format. So I would say, and the other aspect is this question of postmodernism, really. So if you're doing what I do, for example, which is mixing up things I like, there isn't anything particularly experimental about that, other than my taste dictates what goes into the pot. I would say the notion of experimental rock is probably dead until somebody changes the instrumentation. Maybe that's the next strain of instrumental rock, that instrumental rock is
You
not
find a lot of
big,
these experimental rock bands are experimental, but they still have drums, bass, guitar, and a vocalist. You know, there's not really any that, you know, might want to scrap a guitar player.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think some of the most interesting experimental rock of the last few years has come out of Denmark, really, and there's a real absence of guitar in a lot of those bands,
Any particular bands?
Unterbuen and
How do you spell that? Just
it's UNDERBYEN, and what's the other guys called? They're stepping away from guitar, bass, and drums format, really, but the music's, it's, you know, you can kind of, you know, when you're not talking about experimental rock when you talk about its tradition, really, because, and I would say that, you know, if you look at the Velvet Underground, they're probably one of the very last examples of experimental rock, and then you look at This Heat, but This Heat also have the tradition in Henry Cow and people like that, and so it becomes, by narrowing margins, something of magnitude. I think a lot of people who are making music are experimenting generally these days. I'm not sure, there's a friend of mine on Facebook actually who's into microtonal metal at the minute, which is about as experimental as you can get, but I'm not sure you know, the experiment is yielding music that I want to listen to particularly.
You could also argue as well that it might not be the metal aspect that's experimental about it. It could just be the microtones, you know.
Well, there's two there's two things there's two barriers that are really out there. Like, so if you've got a problem with microtonal music and you've got a problem with metal, then that's an outer limit for somebody, isn't it? But I would say
I feel like both, and definitely it's...
they're a genuine. That's a genuine representation of experimentation in rock. Not all experiments are fruitful. I think for me, like I keep saying, experimental with a small e. I like things to be sort of conventionally pretty as well as interesting.
Yeah, you need to find that balance, otherwise no one's going to want to listen to it, really.
Yeah, and I think
like no one's going to want to hear like all the open strings of a guitar played for like 16 minutes straight with nothing.
Well, there are tracks that you know. There's Reece Chatham. That's exactly what those are. It's you know, they're drone pieces. But they're compelling listening as well. Glenn Branca, those pieces are, they're tuned specifically for. But it's I think I'm probably the wrong person to ask because I'm quite I've got a pop sensibility, but experimental outlook.
That's
maybe.
Good, best of both worlds.
Yeah. But yeah, I think the your sense of what is right mitigates what you put out, really. So experiment away as long as you've got a conviction that you're enjoying what you're doing. Yeah.
Awesome. What are your influences musically?
Well, I started off. I think the first few things that made an impression on me were things like the Clockwork Orange soundtrack and Holster Planet and those things. They've got a visual aspect to the music as well. And so typically the music that I've liked over the years are things like horror soundtracks and very kind of atmospheric electronic music. Things like krautrock, which is Canon, Faust, and all those people, and ambient music generally. There was a cliche doing the rounds several years back, particularly in the Wire magazine sort of review style, that was talking about soundtracks to non-existent films, and I think that's pretty much what I want out of music. I want music that conjures a visual dimension to it, really.
That makes sense. Yeah. Who are you listening to lately?
Who was I listening? I was listening to the Stranglers the other day, actually. And it's funny. I realised quite a lot of my formative years. I've gone back to Bauhaus to see whether I actually like Bauhaus, and I found that there's quite a lot of my guitar style comes from that, even though I really hated it at the time.
Yeah, subconsciously then.
Subconsciously, I've mopped a bit of that up, I think, really. But I listen to things like Xenakis, and particularly when I'm working here on things like sound art, I like to keep myself topped up in music concrete and things like that. But for pleasure, I've been listening to Holy Other and Burial and things like that. So I like the sort of textural element of that, and I like the way that the melody's kind of it's neither a foremost consideration but it's what's there is beautiful as well. So that's the stuff that I like to listen to for pleasure, really.
Yeah. What would you say would be your favourite track to have worked on throughout the Verve sort of?
What of our own things?
Just one that you could pick and say, that's my favourite.
Well, the general trajectory of the Verve is synonymous with advances in technology, really. So by the time we got to the very last album, the last album being Fourth, that whole album was amazing fun to make, because at that point in time, like 97 was the first Verve record that had a Pro Tools rig on it, for example. And so for me that was an immensely liberating experience, having the machine in the corner where I could go and treat my own playing as this plastic thing that I could take apart and reassemble. And so, not being a particularly technically good guitar, I would call myself competent at best as a guitarist. It meant that I could then assemble these ideas that I couldn't necessarily execute there on the spot. So it was great because it relieved me of the responsibility of having to get things right there and then, which was always a problem for me with tape rolling, tape being so expensive, studio time being
inconvenient, if anything.
Well, it lends an air of paranoia to someone like me, kind of has a tendency to overthink things anyway.
Yeah.
Having the computer gave me the sort of objective version of objective distance from my own work, basically. But by the time we got to Fourth, that was a given, really. So it was, ironically, what that lent back to the process was that it gave us live improvisational freedom, so that we could do these like 2-hour pieces that could get condensed down into, the other irony is that would then make some of those pieces be very, very focused, whereas other ones would have no kind of ceiling on them, basically. Okay. So that was a lot of fun to make that record.
All right.
Yeah.
Ashcroft said that the song "Drugs Don't Work" has his own kind of meaning to him. Are there any Verve songs that have like a special meaning to you?
Yeah, I mean it's associative really, because I kind of, one of the difficulties with the band that's had as many problems as that band had is that there is a tendency to tie things to negative aspects, because there was lots of political tensions in the band, but yeah, a lot of songs also remind me of really good times that we had with the band as well. So things like Weeping Willow and a tune called Catching the Butterfly from Urban Hymns, they've got very good associations. So yeah, and most of Fourth, we were in pain from laughing really. So it's kind of like it wasn't just fun making that record. We got on up until a point anyway.
Yeah.
We were all. I mean, 3 of us remain best of friends now, but yeah, the first 6 weeks in particular of that, it was just in pain from laughing most of the time. So quite a lot of Fourth has got that association for me. It was a healthy process making the record, and it was also a good point personally, like making that record, which is part of the reason for doing this industry in the first place. That you know,
no one would do it if it wasn't fun, would it?
Exactly.
Really,
yeah. I've worked in an office, I can enjoy it.
Yeah,
so.
no, I can equate that to my 2 months working in a shop.
yeah. It's
so, scenario: you were trapped on a desert island, but you could bring a small amount of gear with you, just musically, anything. What would you bring?
It's pretty easy, really. Yeah, it's what I'm trying to reduce my touring big to. So laptop, an interface, and a guitar. Yeah, and a load of soft synths. It's all you need, really.
Definitely. What do you like about music today? Like, just in general?
I don't really try and keep up with it, because the deluge is just it's vast. What I am heartened by is the fact that the quality's really up. And people say, it's not like it were in my day, kind of thing. But it's just there's a little bit too much respect paid to music, I think, really. Which is funny, because we're here, and this is where you learn to kind of you learn correct procedure while you're here. But it's I would say there's a level of disregard, and I think I've talked about this in one of the sessions where I said outsider status is actually to your advantage, really. It's great to know correct practice, but also retaining that.
It's all subjective, isn't it?
Yeah. And knowing instinctively when to kind of throw correct practice out the window. I don't hear a lot of that these days. But yeah, I think as we're saying, like, we're having a laptop, you've got the full toolkit really there.
You can do everything in there.
You can do everything in there, yeah, of course. And what's separating one artist from another is the quality of ideas, or the originality of ideas. The danger is, the cliche about the internet is that taste is becoming normalised, and so is practice. Practice is becoming normalised as well. And I do hear that a lot in music, but I also hear a lot of very well crafted recordings that I know have been done on a shoestring, which is really impressive, I think.
What don't you like about music today? It's a predictable question after the last one.
Yeah, it's. I think what we're missing generally is we're missing a conduit. We're missing. In my years coming up, my formative years of being a music fan, we had John Peel, so he fulfilled a very definable curatorship role. So things that came via John Peel, you knew what you were getting with him, and he also had, because he was a conduit to various other independent labels, you could kind of fall back upstream to those things. We're missing that now, really. I think we don't have a curator figure whereby the cream of the crop can, or at least their subjective taste in things. We don't have the kind of richness and diversity and fragmentation of music. It's just like a big sprawl out there with that most listeners have got to navigate through, and that means that we'll never have one of those big defining movements like punk while it's this fragmented. I think that's a shame. I can't really I think the standard of like manufactured pop music is actually really, really good, but even though it's not my taste, I can there isn't anything that I find repugnant these days, which is definitely true of my day. There were like all these horrible novelty records and just general sort of shoddy, unimaginative pop bilge at the time. I think the standard's actually pretty high now, really. I would just say that it's a little bit too. It's too refined. It's too
perfect.
It's too perfect, and people pursuing perfection. I think the lesson of technology is that perfection isn't all that, really.
Yeah, definitely. Last one. If you could form a supergroup, who would you form a supergroup with? This was.
There'll be some dead people there. Jackie Lieberzeit on drums.
Yeah.
Liz Fraser on vocals.
Do you want to say who these are from, by the way?
Okay, so Jackie Lieberzeit's the drummer from Cannes. Bill Evans on piano, who's the pianist from Miles Davis.
Yeah.
I'm not in it, by the way. Liz Fraser's on vocals. So we got Bill Evans on piano, Jackie Lieberzeit on drums, Liz Fraser on vocals. Who else do we need in there?
You haven't got a bass player yet.
I'm thinking about a string quartet as well, but I can't think of like an iconic one. There's a string quartet there. They're good players.
You've already exhausted my knowledge of string quartets.
I can only think of Kronos, and they tend to do quite angular things, so not them really as much as I like them. On bass, Danny Thompson, who's John Martin's bass player, played on Pentangle, played with Bert Jansk, all those guys.
So that's
and
bass,
saxophone,
keys, and vocals.
Yeah, we got Alice Coltrane playing harp.
Nice.
I think I'll leave it there. Actually, I don't think I'll have a guitarist in there. Actually, who would I have if there was? Yeah, I'm not that keen on guitar, really.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, Bill Frisell on guitar, I think maybe.
Awesome. Yeah. Right, thank you very much.
All right, nice one. Thank you very much. Cheers.